journey is long, but so is a tourney. Let's track down some trophies and crack the game early.
It only counts if it mounts. Comment below as we walk through the Week 3 recap of Outlaw Standard.
Okay, Rebellion bet update. Azorius Control has closed in on Domain with 3 trophies this past week to Domain's goose egg. I'm still in the lead though. It's now 5 trophies for Domain to 4 trophies for Azorius Control. The season is heating up quickly. For those who didn't see our last video, whichever has the most trophies when rotation hits in the fall will get to create 2 tokens, one for themselves and one for the loser. I think we all know it's going to get wild in our designs. Now, for our tier list breakdown.
Alrighty gang, so Tier 1 has Esper Midrange back at the helm once more with Boros Convoke, Temur Ramp, and 4-color Slogurk holding steady. The big surprise this week, and a welcome one for me, is the rise of Azorius Control and the fall of Domain. And it feels good to watch the gap close considerably this past week, and Azorius Control looks to be the Tier 1 contender I'd hoped for.
Tier 2 is where Domain fell to, but Mono Red is still holding steady here. The newcomer, you wouldn't guess it, good old Bant Toxic is back at last.
And this week's Brewer's Corner features a unique take on Mishra, a grindy Azorius Midrange build, a Golgari deck that pushes the definition of ramp, and a Temur Prowess deck that's embracing all the tricks available.
Oh yeah. Rebels, by now you've likely become acquainted with our partner TOAMagic. Their single package shipping, event pickup for your favorite conventions, and ease of use make them the ideal sponsor for our channel.
TOA, like us, are all about dependability and reliability, so when you purchase with TOA, you can be sure they'll get it done right. As a bonus, viewers of the Rebellion can use code REBELLION at checkout for 5% off your order.
Alright, and now onto our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Esper Midrange.
Renan Korea made it to the final of the 150-player showdown in Sao Paulo, Brazil this past weekend on the back of Esper Midrange, making them one of 19 players to top 8 the 11 events we scraped for metagame analysis. So let's dive a little bit into the specifics here. As we can see, Wedding Announcement is back. I know that's been a debate everybody's been having. Do you want the build from the Pro Tour that eschews it entirely and plays Duelist to the Mind, or do you take the grindy build? And it looks like Wedding Announcement's proving out yet again. On that note, Pest Control stuck the landing, 3 copies in the sideboard. It's doing great. No More Lies has returned to the main board as a 3 of. We see that there is no Rest in Peace in the sideboard, but Tishana's Tidebinder, a 3 of in the sideboard. We are seeing the comeback of a lifetime for the Tidebinder, and I don't think it's really a guessing game as to why. Like with Temur Ramp, with Domain, all of these decks that are so reliant on triggers, Tishana's Tidebinder is like a flash Stone Rain against Temur Ramp. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely deserves some play, especially in Esper. I gotta ask you though about something else, another matchup, specifically like the Temur matchup. Is Denick good enough to stop the graveyard play we're seeing right now, in your opinion? Does the deck really even need to consider Rest in Peace?
I mean, personally, I like to have at least a Miser's copy of Rest in Peace in my Esper Midrange sideboard because the effect as a 1-of is incredibly powerful. You know, I can see why you wouldn't necessarily want a second copy. It's, you know, redundant. It doesn't work out so well. And to be fair, they're going to board in like 3 Pick Your Poison because you play potentially Rest in Peace, but definitely Rafine, and Pick Your Poison sitting there for those Deep Cavern Bats, Rafines, etc. So I can see why Rest in Peace is getting eschewed, but I still don't think it's correct. I think the card's great as a 1-of. I would at least put 1 on the side.
Yeah, I'm going to concur with you there, especially with the big threat that Temur is. But let's talk about the deck that got 3 trophies, Azorius Control.
TSP Gendrick took down the 65-player MTGO Challenge on Saturday with Azorius Control, making them one of 12 top 8s and one of 3 trophies that this beautiful archetype managed. Now, a personal thanks is owed, as this certainly helped my betting odds over the weekend, and a shout out to Liam Hoban as well for taking down the 365-player regional championship in Canada yesterday with Azorius Control as well. So let's talk a little bit about these nuances. As you can see in the sideboard and in the main, Tishana Tidebinder, the comeback continues. Thanks Temur Ramp and all those control mirrors. Depopulate, still a 2 of in the main, and probably that's just due to Esper Midrange, because that's really where it shines. We're also, if you look at that mana base, there's no Mirexes. There's no Sunken Citadels. It's not a problem. Given the mana constraints of cards like No More Lies, this doesn't really surprise me. Mirex is fantastic in the mirror, and outside of that, it's a little rough. In the sideboard, we're seeing that 2-1 split of Flanker to Rest in Peace. I think that's fantastic. And they also shifted a Dust Animus in place of like Ezrim or, Boonbringer Valkyrie. It's build a Baneslayer. I love it.
Yeah, definitely a different take, and I'm here for it, even though I don't like seeing it win as much as it is. But to ask about one of that I saw on the sideboard there, what are the best matchups to bring in C double, and how do you best utilize that card?
I mean, I think the reason that card is here is because Temur Ramp is around, and the ability to have them launch a lethal World Souls Rage at you, and you're just like, our World Souls Rage, comrade, and shove it right back at them. I think that's why C-Double's around, honestly. I don't know that I really want it anywhere else outside of that, but as a one-up for that matchup, that's spicy. That's really spicy.
It absolutely is, and I love seeing that happen to... that's probably the best thing you can do right there to counter World Souls Rage. That sounds like a lot of fun, especially as I don't like Temur. 4-color Slogurk. What's going on with this one?
So Jonathan Lobo Melamed smashed the 150-player showdown in Sao Paulo, Brazil this past Saturday with 4-color Slogurk, taking home a trophy and making them one of 9 players to top 8 with this archetype last week. Now, week to week, we look to see what changes occur as archetypes evolve, so let's see what has changed here. Now, first and foremost, I look at the sideboard, I see a 3-1 split of Glistening Deluge to Path of Peril. That's uncommon. The Path of Peril in particular is not something I commonly see, and if you do see it, you don't tend to see it with Deluge. So clearly, this is a Slogurk player that is sick of losing to Boros Convoke and is making it an issue. Now, similarly, you're only seeing one Turn the Earth, where in the past I've seen potentially multiple copies of that in the sideboard to deal with the mill strategy. So I don't think there's as much concern to play against Jaces with this build as there have been in the past. There's just that one Turn the Earth to just pop right back up and make sure you can win the following turn. Lastly, I look at the sideboard. I'm seeing those 3 Duresses due to Domain, Temur, and Azorius Control. So the main board seems to be positioned more anti-aggro, and the sideboard is positioned more anti-swarm or anti-control.
That makes a lot of sense. That tracks. I'm a huge advocate of the Duress in a control world. But what is the ideal game plan for the Domain matchup post-board?
I think in an ideal world, Max, we're going to take out those cutdowns. They're always dead. We're going to take out the Titania that's mostly dead, and the Acklazotz that's also pretty dead, and probably a copy or two of Go for the Throat. And we're going to bring in those Duresses. We're going to bring in Lily of the Veil. We're going to bring in the Jace, the Shelly, the Urtai, and we're just going to play a little bit more of a tempo game than we're used to with some, an interesting loop of being able to bring back Jace and just mill him out really fast. I like where that's positioned.
Yeah, the temptation is to face control by just playing through it and making them counter your stuff but that's right. In this situation with this deck, you really do want to slow the pace down and kind of play more smartly. But yeah, I like that game plan. Let's talk about now aggro Boros Convoke. What's going on with that deck this week?
So Berna Stores took down a 30-player MTGO preliminary event with Boros Convoke, making them one of 3 Boros Convoke players to snag a trophy over the last week and one of 8 to top 8. So let's talk about where this list is shifting as we continue. First of all, 2X Nurturing Pixie, it's back. I was wondering if this was going to make a comeback or if the pros had been right and it just didn't deserve the slots, but here we see it making that comeback, doing well. I love it, especially because we're seeing that 3-3 split of Case and War Leader's Call. And when you have War Leader's Call and Nurturing Pixie, that feels like you're just adding an extra 2 to 3 points of damage, depending on if you're bouncing back Sanguine Evangelist, Knight Errant, Resolute Reinforcements. It's fantastic. I also like that we have that one Sanguine Evangelist, but we are not trying to play multiples. That card, again, is extremely powerful as a one-of effect, but I don't know that you want to play multiples of a non-hasty creature like that, especially when Azorius Control is all about Sunfall and Exile-based removal.
Yeah, the swap back to Pixie, going back to the 3 War Leaders Call, the 1 Sanguine Evangelist, that really indicates to me that this deck wants to extend a little bit longer, go the distance, so to speak. Do you think this is necessary for the current meta picture or an overcorrection?
To me, it makes a lot of sense. The games are going to get slower, especially post-board, and we are going to see more interaction, and Nurturing Pixie allows you to play, to a degree, around Wrath effects by saying, okay, so we expect a Sunfall next turn, let's go ahead and sacrifice the Pixie, bounce back, the Knight Errant, hold a couple other creatures in hand. The moment they Wrath, we just reestablish board position. And again, it combos so well with War Leader's Call. And I think that's part of it. So yeah, with the format slowing down a little bit and it being very Wrath heavy, especially as the game plan against Boros Convoke, I can see why we want to go that route.
Yeah, I'm always complimenting this deck on its ability to rebuild after a board wipe. So yeah, that totally tracks. Let's talk about the final deck in our Tier 1 archetypes, Temur Ramp.
All right, gang, so this is an extremely rare occurrence, but Burna Stories also took down a 53-player MTGO challenge this past weekend, and this time it was using Temur Ramp as their chosen archetype. Temur also snagged 2 trophies and 6 top 8s this past week, but unlike Boros Convoke, did so in larger tournaments, adding some validity to its continued stay in Tier 1 land. I mean, after Domain took down the Pro Tour, we knew this archetype was in for some tweaks, as its natural prey has traditionally been Big Ol' Atraxa. So let's kind of take a look at where this ended up. First of all, those 3 Fires of Victory in the main, that stuck. I was wondering if it was going to make it or if Vampire's Vengeance was going to get shuffled back in, but it looks like Fires of Victory is where we're positioned for the time being. Shigeki Singleton is just proving out. It's too versatile to lose. The ability to channel, grab back threats they're countering, it gets the game to where you need to be if they're going to be countering, if they're going to be interacting. The 3 Pick Your Poison in a world of Rest in Peace and Rafine continues to be a turning point and a linchpin in the sideboard. And of course, we're seeing that 2x Bonnie Paul and a Titan of Industry as alt win cons off the sideboard, and that seems extremely intelligent.
Yeah, it really does. Bonnie Paul, epic card. How do players most effectively use Turn the Earth, though? Which matchups are those copies in there for?
I mean, Turn the Earth to me is really a way of saying we expect Jace. We expect Slogurk to play the Jace plan. We expect Azorius Control to play the Jace plan. And if we're going to see people trying to mill us out, we want the ability to quick on our upkeep, shuffle back in a copy of World Souls Rage or 2, and just kill them. Because it erases their ability to rely on Jace to just win out of nowhere. And I think that's really the point of it, is it's an easy inclusion. Most of the time you're not trying to draw it. Most of the time you won't draw it. But you're able to play it on upkeep and maintain your game state and give yourself at least one more turn.
Yeah, that takes away one way I thought I could beat Temur Ramp was to help them mill themselves. But all right, yeah, definitely shoring up a weakness there. With that we're done. Tier 1. Let's go down to Tier 2, where I'll actually begin by discussing Domain. Man, it is rough to compete with a target on your back. Am I right? Domain certainly felt the effects of winning a Pro Tour this past week. The focus shifted to prioritizing enemy number 1, and the Phyrexian hordes, they were driven back. Zera managed to top 8 a 65-player MTGO challenge, however, despite the hate, proving the archetype's resiliency, along with 5 other players who top 8'd this past weekend using the Lord and Savior, Atraxa. But let's look at how this deck has shifted recently to meet the hate, right? We've got 2 copies of Long Goodbye in the main, going more towards the single-targeted removal, right? We want to get rid of those Rafines. There's no temporary lockdowns here to speak of in the main as well. Very interesting shift. Also, the 4 of the Beanstalks. This card, typically a hard card for Control to deal with in particular, right? Countering it feels bad. Letting it play out feels bad. No basic mountains. The mana base has consolidated. And then, of course, you've got a 3-2 Rest in Peace Tranquil Frillback split also for that Temur matchup.
So, Max, I look at this and I saw how much it's fallen off this last week with the target directly on its back. I'm not sure that target will continue to exist as we move a couple weeks into the future, but let's say it does. Can this archetype reliably play through that hate?
Well, let's talk about some of those adjustments, right? We're not seeing Invasion of Zendikar. We're seeing Spelunking and Cartographer's Survey. That's a start, because Tidebinders were killing that card. They were hitting it pretty often. We've seen Up the Beanstalk come back into the deck, and as I mentioned, hard to deal with, right? You counter it, feels bad because you're using up a counter spell on this 2-drop here that, just draws them a card. But then if you don't counter it, later on they play 5-drop, they get to draw. It just, I don't know. It's a weird card for Control to deal with. Taking out the temporary lockdowns, relying instead on Sunfall and the Depopulate also means that the enchantment removal that decks like Boros Convoke pack, right, Destroy Evil, doesn't end up actually helping them rebuild. I think that was the thing that was happening just a bit too often. And then Frillback had to come back, along with, right, the introduction of Rest in Peace. Only one card hating out the graveyard play from Temur wasn't enough, as we saw during the Pro Tour. You need just a bit more.
I mean, honestly, Max, I'm just hoping at some point we get a secret layer where it goes baby back Frill, but, you know, we'll see if it happens.
God.
We'll see if it happens. In the meantime, let's go to a deck that absolutely hates Domain, Mono Red.
All right, so Mono Red Aggro snagged 4 top 8s and 1 trophy this past week, keeping it firmly in Tier 2 lane for the moment. This list, piloted by the hilariously named I Love You, actually took down a 24-player MTGO preliminary, showing that yet again this archetype can reinvent itself constantly with a plethora of threats at its disposal, despite being monocolored. Let's talk about it, though. We've got Cacophony Scamp 2 of in here. Interesting card to bring back. As a 2 of, I think that's the sufficient perfect amount if you're trying to shift towards the meta that we currently have. 4 Pyrotechnic Performers. This card, I think it actually synergizes well with Codebreaker and actually works when you're trying to pump your creatures. We've only got 2 Witchstalker Frenzies in the main. I think the things that we're targeting have shifted just a bit. And of course, we talked about this before, the Cemetery Gatekeeper in the sideboard, awesome card against Temur Ramp. Gotta hate that deck out, even when you're mono red.
Absolutely. Now, Max, I look at this, those Pyrotechnic Performers, that's new. That's a card we have not seen in any mono red list until exactly this moment. Do you think it's strong enough to merit that inclusion?
So you have to consider that the meta shifting towards bigger decks, Esper Midrange, Control, Domain, Temur. This card, statistically, it's going to get hit less often by low curve board wipes like Temporary Lockdown, and also activating this card using the disguise mechanic. The ward 2 on it becomes more relevant in light of that, because that's a shift back towards single target removal. So it sticks around just a little bit longer. And it also provides an interesting alternative win con, besides the slick shot, that synergizes well with Codebreaker in the fact that you're pumping up your creatures, you flip it, you do a ton of damage, and it goes from there.
Fair. Now, speaking of weird aggro lists, especially one that's on the rise, let's talk a little bit about Bant Toxic.
Oh yeah, let's talk about Bant Toxic. Look, 6 top 8s, no trophy for the Toxic players this past week. Featured here is GCB's top 4 finishing build from Saturday's 53-player MTGO Challenge. Now, while many people counted out this deck, it gained nearly no new pieces from Thunder Junction, right? And it's still doing what it's doing. The moment I saw a finals match between Domain and Azorius Control, I knew we'd see this deck surge back into the limelight. Make sure you turn on your notifications for this channel, because we'll be releasing a comprehensive deck tech and sideboard guide for this archetype in the coming weeks. Now, let's get into where this build shifted, because it did shift. Botanical Sanctum fixed the mana finally and keeps us relatively pain-free. No more coasts. Awesome. Aspirant's Ascent sticks the landing as a 4 of over Experimental Augury. And also, 2 CC curve out, not 1/3 drop in the main. So very low curve, very easy to pilot in that case. They're just going for the full aggro. 4x Annex Sentry in the sideboard, not in the main. So just wanted to point out those shifts.
I mean, I looked at it and I just see all this blank space when it curves out at 2, and I'm like, holy crap, I haven't seen that much blank space in a long time. But I look at a list like this, Max, and is this essentially a tier 1.5 archetype that you shelve unless, the meta just happens to hit it right, like it did this last week with Domain, Temur Ramp, and Azorius Control?
Oh yeah, and if you tune back to last week's video, I predicted that we would see more aggro this week. I had this deck in mind when I said that. Skrelv's Hive seems well placed in a meta without Temporary Lockdown seeing too much play. Slower paced decks are really battling it out at the top. So it was actually a good week for this deck to come back. Yes, I do believe this deck only pops up its little mite-sized head when it's not being actively hunted. But another week of this, and the second part of my prediction from last week will come true. You're going to start seeing decks prey upon this and other hyper aggros. So maybe Golgari coming back to do some whack-a-mole, right?
Sure. I could see that. And with that, we are through the tier 2 list. We are on to my favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. Let's kick things off and talk a little bit about Grixis Mishra. Alrighty, so credit to Matt961-Rune20 of the MTGR Discord for shoving this list our way. This is a wild one, actually, and I really like what he pulled together with this. So let's start with some of the basics. Push-pull, the ability to play pull, grab back both Mishra and Friction Dragon Engine. They have haste. They immediately get to meld into the Walker. Yeah, we finally found a list that can do this, guys. We finally have a list that goes into Mishra, Lost to Phyrexia, and just KOs your opponent out of nowhere. Here's the other fun trick with this. Look at Lila. If you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery spell, you exile it, it gets plotted, right? Guess how these cards work when they get plotted? You get to blow up a tapped creature, and then next turn you get to play the pull side of it off of the plot, which allows you to go again, Mishra into Friction Dragon Engine. This is such a sweet list. Like, it needs a lot of tuning. I'm not saying it's tier 1 by any means, but like, how do you not at least try? After so many, I mean, I spent so long trying to make Friction Dragon Engine and Mishra work. I'm in. Just for that alone, I'm in.
Yeah. Same here. I made a what I called a meld Klazats with Aklazats build like a couple of months ago, and it didn't do too hot. But the idea of this popping off and melding, that's so credit to Matt961 for really this holding up the spirit of Brewer's Corner. That's a brew.
Yes, it is. And we're gonna move right along. Max, tell us a little bit about Azorius Midrange.
All right. So, partner on the Rebelcast, Athena the Bun, from the Rebellion Discord. Let's take a look at this deck. I want to summarize it by saying there's a lot of all-star cards in here that you see in these colors typically in other decks going up the curve. So you start with some of the best one-drops in the game right now. You're seeing Spyglass Siren and Novice Inspector. They provide value on entry, so that's huge. But then I want to point out another synergy, right? Siren, Denick on the flip side, and the Inspector all provide the artifacts you need for Ezreal to be an engine. And then, of course, we've got some other staples for, coming from other decks. Cryptic Coat, Wandering Emperor, the Schooner, and Tidebinder all do a really good job of pacing with control decks. So I just want to point out this shell, it seems like a mid-range shell that, mid-range typically doesn't do as well against control currently, but this mid-range shell seems like it's oriented in that direction. Likely this is also a decent shell for Jace. It can be protected with the creatures. You have counter spells to, ward things off, and you really get to plot some good 3-drops and 2-drops for the long game.
Fair. I don't know. I've played so much Azorius Control at this point. Going to mid-range feels like I'm like speeding up, but I'm still going to give it a shot. That said, we've got another one here. Let's look at Golgari Ramp. Credit to Nerd Time of the MTG Rebellion Discord sending us this gem. Honestly, I want to change the name to just the Get Rog Rides Again, baby, because it's all about moving up there and getting there. I love this card, and frankly, if anybody hasn't had a chance to play Pillage the Bog with more than like 4 lands in play, it feels like a demonic tutor. It's amazing. I'm a huge fan, and this is absolutely the kind of deck for it. I love that we have a ramp deck that's going to use this in a demonic tutor capacity, and Archdruid's Charm is fantastic for that as well, giving you that viability on turn 3 to either ramp yourself up or just find a creature you need, like, Get Rogs. So it's also embracing that piece of domain where you have the ability to have this early kind of herd domain scenario where you discard it, grab a land, gain 3 life, and then late game dump a big threat into play. It's got a ways to go. Obviously, this is going to be competing with Golgari Midrange and trying to find that sweet spot as to whether or not it's like slightly bigger than midrange and therefore viable because it eats other midrange decks. But it's interesting the way it's trying to position itself.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I could fit a Caustic Bronco or 2 in there.
Ooh, yeah. Maybe a Shadow of Mortality, really get after it. I'm in.
Yeah. But let's talk about the last deck we have in our Brewer's Corner for you today. I'm going to talk about Temur Prowess. Credit to Hari Konan of the Rebellion Discord. Let's take a look at what we gain. This is a constant series, right? We're comparing different Prowess builds. So let's compare this again to the Mono Red build. You're gaining access to Audacity, Tyvar Stand, right? You need some protection. Elusive Otter, which is its own prowess body, but has a really cool front side. Questing Druid, which we already know about that card, how good it is. And then, interestingly enough, Slick Sequence. So you can access all these cards. You can draw from Audacity and Slick Sequence, allowing you to rely on actual card draw over, allow those exile the top of your library until the end of turn kind of cards. Otter actually fits into this shell very well, being an adventure card that provides that sort of card advantage value and a relevant body. So it's interesting, the minor advantages you get from the card draw here in this deck. Sequence also reliably hits low curve creatures and provides 2 effects for 1 most of the time that you use it. Paired with other removal on opponent's creatures, and you're combating other aggro decks pretty efficiently.
Fair. Rebels, each week we are going to vote on the most popular brew. The winner will be added to our Hall of Game in the MTG Rebellion Discord and given the unique role of Brewmaster. So comment below, let us know what you think the best brew was this week so we can tally those votes. And that will bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 12 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 4 of Outlaw Standard?
So, the rise of Azorius Control, the fall of Domain signal a few things, right? First, that there's still really no tier 0 deck breaking the format. Second, if you place a large enough target on any one archetype's back, it's going to get hit pretty hard the following week.
And I mean, we saw evidence of this in the Pro Tour itself when Esper Midrange made up nearly a third of the field, but only managed 2 top 8 slots due to all the hate and hedges made against it.
Yeah, so the return of Bant Toxic is honestly the most telling of how slowed down this metagame has become. The list cannot battle efficiently against most of the other aggro decks. Similarly, Mono Red returning with a slight repackaging indicates a push to keep the format from turning into an inbred slogfest of ramp and control.
So for next week, I'm going to predict the continued push for Azorius Control, as I've experienced firsthand how strong the archetype is, although, frankly, I've got some bias on wanting to win the bet.
That makes sense. Whereas I'm guessing actually that Esper Midrange adapts once more to the slower format, starts knocking off opponents left and right, as per usual for the deck. While this archetype has really been a top 8 machine lately, it's time to see it translate that into some trophies, right?
And if you're looking for something a little bit faster, I'd recommend looking into Bant Toxic, as ignoring all the incidental life gain in the format has made this a dangerous aggro archetype indeed.
Okay. As for me, I'm going to go down that old dusty trail for me, back to Boros Convoke. It's a deck with enough malleable pieces that can stretch the game out if it needs to, tackle some of those mid-range opponents. But, regardless of whichever deck you choose, as Riktus has said, as I have said, there's no dominant deck. And that really, to me, makes this one of the most interesting standard metas that I've seen in a long time.
And that leads me to this week's community challenge. Pick that deck that you never play. If you're uncomfortable piloting control, mid-range, combo, try it on the ladder this week. Tune it for the meta, try it out. If you need help, we're here to catch you in our Discord and in the comments. Worst case scenario, you learn something new that you can apply to playing the decks you are comfortable with.
Oh yeah. Thank you for supporting the Rebellion. Special shout out to our members who support our content monthly. And like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of these. Every interaction you make with our videos helps the competitive community. So we'll be back next week with more analysis.
Until next time, Rebels. Untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.